three dimensions. We have asylum from Libya to Tunisia, asylum from Syria to Tunisia, and asylum from Syria to Jordan. So I said we looked at stories regarding children in both countries, and what are the legislations that protect these children in these countries? And what is the Tunisian experience like? What is the Jordanian experience like? So there are models of these stories for children refugees. And in this framework, we selected stories about Libyan children as well, who were forced to go to Tunisia, and also Syrian children at the Jordanian border. And then we also adopted a model of a Syrian living in Tunisia as a joint model between the two countries. And as I said, we had video footages where we had interviews with children, and this allowed us to collect testimonies for the purpose of our research. We tried to compile direct testimonies of children, but since we don't have too much time, we relied particularly on testimonies that are direct and indirect. A child refugee is a child who was forced to leave their home or their home country and crossing international borders and requesting international protection. Here we looked at the international mechanism to protect children, and in this regard we looked at international conventions and organizations. But time does not allow us to engage too much in the details of this. But we will leave the document with you so that you can look at it in detail. As for children refugees, we also looked at legislative protective mechanisms in Tunisia and Jordan. As for the Tunisian constitution, I'm sorry, I cannot read the numbers now because the numbers changed. Now, I was referring to the Tunisian constitution. Regarding the constitution, yes, thank you. There is an engagement in international conventions such as the Convention on Children's Rights, and therefore legislations were issued to protect refugees. And of course, special attention was given to children refugees. As for the Jordanian constitution, we look back at Article 21, which gives us the right of asylum for refugees. And here there was a ratification of the Anti-Discrimination Convention and the Children's Rights Convention. And so a number of laws were issued to protect children refugees particularly. Actually, for my presentation for tomorrow, I was going to read these texts to you, but since there was a change in the program of the conference, I do not have the chapters to read to you now from the Tunisian constitution. I'm sorry about this. I'm sorry about this unintended mistake or unforeseen mistake. So let us move on to the video footage. In the first video footage, we were looking at asylum from Libya to Tunisia. Why did we select this footage? Because it shows us the displacement of a large number of families to the Tunisian border due to the proximity of the two countries. Now, the footage is from a TV show, and it was under the title of Libyan Children and Families, the difficulty of their conditions. And here we have testimonies of certain people from the Libyan officials at the embassy. As for the other footage, I'm sorry, you only have 2 minutes left. As for the second footage, it is called Syrians Without a Home or Without a Title. And here we have 3 children, Fahd, Ruya, and Layan, and they were displaced without their parents. And here the children talk about their suffering during their asylum journey. As for the third footage, which was selected, it is for 2 children, refugees from Syria who went to Tunisia. And this was filmed in the southern part of Tunisia. And they talk about their asylum story. And I will move on directly to the effects. There were social effects, health effects, and educational effects that impact the psyche of the children. And we wanted to support these effects with quotes from the children. So, for example, when it comes to the Libyan-Tunisian asylum case, the child says, "I am not feeling okay," and there is an educational impact. The same child is saying, "I want to study in Libya." And we saw that the Libyan child was saying that with weaponry or being shot with weaponry. Regarding the health dimension, one of the children said that we were stuck for months from one home to the next. As for psychological suffering, one of the children was saying, "I was crying all the time. We went through a lot of difficulties." In the final piece of footage, here, the testimony shows that the child is saying, "We have a difficult life here in Tunisia, and we are begging." As for the effects in the educational dimension, the child would say, "I read or I studied for only 2 to 3 days." So this shows that there is now a lack of education as well. So this is why I wanted to elicit the testimonies through video footage. In the end, I will say that the effects vary based on the circumstances and the environment where the refugee exists. And we found out that there is a number of phenomena such as begging and instability, and there are also common phenomena in the various countries as well. I would like to conclude with an open message to children, which is this. 2030, the UN has stated that there should be an international identity, and there is also an initiative called the Free Generation, and this relates to the education of people by the year 2030. So I wanted to close my talk with a message of hope, and I would like to thank you for your listening.
We thank she discussed refuge and its impact on refugee children and the impact of this on them. And she reviewed cases from Syria, Jordan, and Tunisia, and she reviewed the laws related to this issue. We give the floor to Dr. Muhammad Abdulsalam Al-Majali, as he will speak about the legal protection for refugees. Thank you. In the name of God, peace be upon Muhammad. First of all, we want to thank the organizers of this conference. We want to thank the facilitator as well, and the scholars, and dear guests. Today, I will speak about the legal protection for refugees. And this legal protection stems from the meaning of refuge. I want to speak about protection and the role that Jordan played despite its scarce resources and despite the shortage of funding delivered by the international community and donor countries in general. However, Jordan, thank God, and under its leadership, managed to put in place successful solutions to the problem of peace. They were successful at times and less successful at others. Still, they succeeded, or Jordan, in containing this problem and to achieve positive outcomes. As we know, being a refugee is a legal status in itself. And here, protection should be granted to because they were persecuted or because they were threatened. And we have political prisoners under this category, and we have refugees who fled their countries for racial discrimination or for other reasons. But at the end of the day, these refugees leave their countries as refugees and become refugees in itself. And refugees start to seek the right to live or right to life. And international conventions and all religions places it as or on top of. We said that people might become refugees because of wars. And Jordan, since 1936, started to receive refugees. And again, in 1948 and 67 up until 2011. This year, at burden, or we are shoulder second biggest host country to refugees per capita. The international efforts to protect the rights of refugees under international conventions is a weak effort in proportion to or related to or compared to what a country like Jordan is delivering despite its scarce resources. Jordan, as we know, has not or is not a signatory to Geneva Convention in 1951 and its protocol in 1967. And there was a memorandum of understanding between Jordan and the UNHCR. These are the efforts exerted by Jordan to deal with refugees, offering refugee to it. Now, and this is a condition that should be met. Their home country should be safe. Otherwise, it would be considered a forced return for refugees or of refugees. And Jordan is against the forced return of refugees. And this is an international principles that all countries stand by. Protection of refugee. And it's the more preferred option for refugees. They prefer it over returning to their homeland. And 87% of refugees now live in Jordanians there. I want to commend the efforts exerted by Jordan because we receive refugees and we do all the legal tasks that are asked from it, although it's not a signatory to international conventions related to refugees. So we commit to international principles and to humanitarian principles. And this, or this, the first task of the Jordanian state is protection. But the other details has to do with the situation of this refugee and whether he has entered legally or illegally. And that's the natural reaction of any host country. If you want to abide by international laws and conventions, then naturally these host countries should provide protection for refugees, depending on the situation of the refugee and based on its capacities or abilities. The complex situation in Jordan, the circumstances in Jordan, and I consider that we are not doing what we used to do because of the reduction in international assistance. I believe that there is a regression nowadays because of lack of funding. As for recommendations, the recommendations, give me one more minute in addition to the 2 minutes, please. I will present the recommendations and the paper and the research will be available. First, the consequences and repercussions should be shared. And there should be better coordination and cooperation with. And three, implementing programs for voluntary return and the need to enact local and Arab legislation that regulate the refugees and the status of refugees. And we need to show what Jordan is doing in this field. And we need to showcase to international and humanitarian standards. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed Abdulsalam Al-Majali, for this clarification regarding the legal protection to refugees in general. And he discussed a very important thing that Jordan's commitment stems from an ethical grounds and on humanitarian grounds. It's not a signatory to some conventions, though. And now we give the floor to a researcher from Libya who will speak about the logistical aspect of refuge in Libya and Jordan. His name is Milad Nasser.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, please God guide us, and prayers be upon the Prophet Muhammad. First, we would like to thank our brothers at the University of Petra for their hospitality and for their hearts and for this beautiful gathering, which has brought us together with elites, academics, professors, men of politics, men and women of politics, etc. I would also like to thank the moderator of this session. Now, the title of the paper is The Logistical System in Regards to the Refuge in Jordan. And without a doubt, humanitarian refuge or asylum is a humanitarian issue. It is related to human rights. And as a result of conflict, crises, wars, famines that exist in different Arab countries, I felt it necessary to highlight the nature of refuge or asylum in Jordan or Libya as a comparative study. And in this research, I used a comparative approach or a comparative methodology, and I looked at various books and literature. And the goal of this paper or this study is understanding the legal texts and international conventions that are related to this topic, in addition to understanding the Jordanian law when it comes to asylum and the logistical role played in Jordan, and understanding the legal and logistical system in Libya when it comes to refuge and asylum. In this research, I presented asylum or refuge. What is it as a phenomenon? Forced displacement. So a person did not voluntarily leave their place of residence, but rather people left due to reasons outside of their control. And we looked at various references and books that discuss this concept. And some of my colleagues have referred to this, or rather have alluded to this. Also in the paper, I talked about the reasons for refuge, and these include ethnicity, race, political opinion, fear, oppression. So these are major reasons that showed us, or rather resulted in asylum, or when people were moving from one place to another. Now, there is asylum or religious refuge. So sometimes people try to find shelter in religious places of worship, such as a mosque or a church, to escape oppression. And there is also diplomatic refuge, which is when somebody goes to an embassy, for example. So let's say now I'm in Jordan. Let's say that I'm a Jordanian in Jordan. I would go to the embassy of Egypt, for example, or the embassy of Libya to request asylum there. So this happens, this types of political asylum, it happens in Europe as well. And in the paper, I talked about the rights of refugees, which include protection from oppression and freedom of movement. And when somebody undertakes refuge, either individually or collectively, the individual, for example, might request after a while that the family join them, and this is their right. Also, discussed the system of humanitarian refuge in Jordan. I address this legally and logistically. So, refuge or asylum can be placed in a legal framework and a logistical system. So, regardless of who the person is, when a person is living in Jordan, or when a refugee is in Jordan, this means that we deal with the refugee logistically and legally in two dimensions. And so I researched Jordanian law, and I found that Jordan does not have a specific law that analyzes this topic. There are texts in the Jordanian law that allude to refugees, but Jordan has not signed various international conventions. When I researched this and I entered into the logistical dimension, I found that Jordan did not hesitate in providing services, logistical services to refugees, whether they were Iraqi, Palestinian, Syrian, or other nationalities. Even though Jordan has a dilapidated economy, it adopted the approach of the open door, you could say, or the policy of the open door. And this has caused problems for Jordan, economic problems, social problems, etc. The camps have problems in them also. So the logistical system was presented by Jordan, and I knew in advance when I began my study that the logistical system provided by Jordan would be as such, because I knew the ethics of the Jordanian people in advance. So I'll give an example. Even when I arrived at the airport, the people welcomed me very, very warmly. This does not happen to me in other Arab countries. So even military personnel in Jordan would deal with us differently from other Arab countries. So if somebody comes to Jordan as a survivor, it's only natural for them to be dealt with in just as good a fashion. I looked at the Jordanian Constitution of 1952 as well, and I looked at Article 21, which talks about protection of persons. And Article 21 is related to refugees and asylum as well. Jordan also provided health care and education and provided various services to the refugees for free. And I am particularly referring to Palestinian and Syrian refugees here, and Iraqi refugees as well. Also, in the paper, I talked about Libya during the reign of the Jamahiriya, during Gaddafi's reign, and at the time there was no specific law as well relating to asylum, whether political or humanitarian asylum. Libya at the time did not like any foreign intervention, and there was a certain ideology in Libya at the time. When I got into the logistical dimension and looked at Libya, I saw that there was an influx of refugees from Africa, waves of refugees from Africa. And so Libya did not provide logistical services inside the state. Other African states did provide assistance and provided investment projects, factories, plants, etc. Also, there was drilling of wells, schools, mosques provided. This was considered logistical support outside the realm of the state itself. A lot of this was done to prevent, it was even done in other countries to prevent illegal migration. There are a number of legislations in Libya not related specifically to asylum, but related thereto. Like not addressing asylum specifically, but related to it. At the end of the paper, I wanted to provide some results, and I arrived at a number of conclusions. The first is that Libya and Jordan are from the countries who suffer from the phenomenon of humanitarian asylum. Also, a number of countries in the world have provided legal assistance to refugees. And in Jordan, there is no law specifically for refugees. And Jordan did not sign the 1951 convention relating to refugees. Jordan is one of the countries which voluntarily abided by conventions and agreements relating to human rights without it necessarily being a party to these agreements and conventions. So it voluntarily adhered to these. Also, the Jordanian government took procedures in order to provide services to the refugees. Jordan, at the end of 2015, launched the Jordanian response plan to the Syrian crisis, which went on till 2018 in order to confront the effects of the Syrian crisis. And the cost of this project was about 8 billion. And it was distributed over a number of sectors in Jordan. In Libya, there is no specific law for asylum, and also Libya, as Jordan, it did not sign the conventions or the Geneva Convention in 1951 or its protocol relating to refugees. Another conclusion is that in Libya, international law supersedes national law and has become implemented in Libya. As for the Anti-Torture Convention and other such conventions, these are relating to refugees, and you cannot, for example, if you receive a refugee, send that refugee back to their home country or deport them back. Libya is one of the countries that are considered transit countries and settlement countries. So Libya is used as a point of transit between Africa and Europe, and Libya has implemented a number of policies to fight illegal immigration. There are 4 recommendations. International organizations need to stand with refugees, and especially with countries who are suffering from conflict, such as Syria, Libya, Iraq. Also, there needs to be logistical and financial assistance to refuge countries as well, such as Libya and Jordan. There is no assistance now, there is no support. Also, illegal migration needs to be combated, and human traffickers need to be combated as well, especially in Africa, because they have exacerbated the phenomenon of humanitarian asylum. Finally, Arab countries provide solutions to prevent civil wars so that humanitarian asylum and refuge does not appear again along with forced displacement. Thank you, and may peace be upon you.
We thank Dr. Ammar from Libya for his research, for this research paper on the logistical and legal system in Libya and Jordan. And the researcher presented or reviewed refuge and the types of refuge, whether political or religious refuge. And he spoke about legal protection in the Jordanian legislation and Libyan legislation and the logistical support, because it's closely related to the legal protection. He also spoke about the supremacy of international laws over local laws. Sometimes it supersedes local constitutions in some countries, provided these international conventions went through the needed legal channels. Thank you, Dr. Ammar. And he spoke nicely about Jordanians by saying that Jordanians were smiling to him, although everyone say that we're always frowning. We move now to researcher, to Miss Asma from Jordan, Asma Mustafa Ghanimat, and who will speak about the free legal counseling for refugees in Jordan. First, we would like to thank the University of Petra for organizing this conference. I'll speak about the legal counseling, the free legal counseling for refugees. Refugees are considered vulnerable. They will have to face some legal problems. And these problems are linked to the communities where they are living. And their problems increase as their stay increases. And they are unable to recruit and to hire an attorney. And hiring an attorney and moving ahead with a legal case is or costs a lot. And given the large number of cases before courts in Mufraq and other areas, this is and this study, it tries to identify or to review how Jordan delivered free legal counseling to refugees and whether they have signed it to law. When we say about legal counseling, we mean providing legal services for needy people free of charge or at minimum cost. And also it means delivering legal services to vulnerable people, including victims of wars and people who cannot afford to hire attorneys. And this segment, in case they are denied these services, could be put at risk or be at danger. And so we try to file lawsuits on their behalf, and we try to limit the costs that they have to bear. And we have the judicial services that we provide. And here we pay the services for those who cannot pay the fees in courts. And we try to expand the number of beneficiaries from these services. Judicial services include judicial assistance and filing lawsuits on their behalf. The Jordanian constitution grants the right to litigation, and the courts are open to everyone. The laws, the litigation laws include many laws, but all these laws does not grant the freedom to everyone to access justice. And some people cannot seek these services because they cannot afford them. In 1998, Jordan and the UNHCR signed a memorandum of understanding which recognizes refugees and provided they can find a place for refugees in Jordan. And Jordan recognized these refugees for a period exceeding the 6 months provided in the MOU. And this MOU states the right to litigation. In 2018, a law was issued for providing legal assistance. And there were standards. The standards were set for being entitled to this kind of legal service. Among the criteria is that the income should not exceed 400 GDs. But this law does not cover all refugees. We have another article which gives priorities to those who are eligible to this service, starting with the youth and legal services to the disabled and to the elderly and to women. And Article 8 called for the creation of a unit to ensure freedoms are guaranteed and to provide legal services to refugees. And we have the Bar Syndicates law, which calls for issuing regulations for legal services. Association is asked to now let's speak about the problems facing refugees in Jordan. We have a problem with the application. If there is a divorced woman and she is eligible for support from her husband, then this case is really a challenge for us. And we have a problem with early marriages, and we have a problem related to applications for family reunion. And we also have cases or disputes related to employees and employers, and we have problems with landlords. So refugees have many or are facing many problems due to the differences in laws that apply in Jordan compared to the laws applied in Syria, and because they are unaware of the system. We don't want to talk about the number of cases in Jordan belonging to Syrian refugees, but as institutions, we have a role to play in providing this legal service. And this service is being provided by the civic society, including Mizan and the Adel Center for Legal Services, in addition to the UNHCR, which has dedicated a hotline for providing this legal service. This kind of help has a positive effect on Jordan as it strengthens stability and security, and it helps avoids criminalities because Syrians will seek to have their rights through the judicial system, not through crimes. Also, when it comes to family affairs, it really helps to provide this legal services. And sometimes it is allowed to open a lawsuit to file a lawsuit without the need to hire attorneys. The Jordanian law aims to achieve justice. However, we are still lacking, or our laws are lacking because an attorney should be hired in rights cases. And so we have a problem in this case. And so we have a larger number of people who cannot stand for their rights or defend themselves. So our laws and legislation is still lacking in some aspects. During the proceedings, some requirements should be placed. In Sharia law, the defendant can defend himself or herself without the need for a lawyer. So the constitution, having a constitution does not guarantee overcoming these challenges. Okay. So she was very fast. She's a lawyer. Lawyers speak fast, they are saying. Also, this system of providing legal services, this legal service is voluntary. It's not obligatory. The impact of this legal service is a burden on the state because the judicial fees during litigation and for hiring lawyers means depriving the system from these fees. So we have 17,000 lawsuits annually, and each case should pay fees of no less than 300. So we can envision the amount of losses to the state coffers. As for the recommendations, it's important to raise the awareness of refugees about their rights and to empower civic institutions to provide this type of service.
So thank you, Ms. Esma Ghanimat, for her presentation and the clarifications regarding legal assistance, free legal assistance. And as she mentioned, there are free services or free assistance by lawyers with work which is being done pro bono. And in the Jordanian law, if somebody has undertaken a certain crime and that person cannot appoint a lawyer, that there are texts and legislations which call for appointment of a lawyer there too. And I think this exists also in other countries. and we thank her for clarifying the free legal assistance. There is free legal administrative assistance as well. So when somebody undertakes a crime, then I believe that the governor cannot deport a person back to their home country, and this is good because in Jordan we know that if somebody undertakes a crime, then this cannot be done against the refugees. After hearing all of the researchers, we will open the door for dialogue for any questions that remain. We will begin with our sister here, but before you ask, please tell us who your question is directed to amongst the speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Ola Abu Hlayil, and I'm very proud today that we are talking about legal assistance. I am one of the lawyers at the Adil Center for Legal Assistance, and we provide legal assistance to all segments of society. The refugee also, we need to keep in mind that they do not have awareness of the laws, and we do not discriminate. We treat everybody equally, and we have filed many lawsuits for refugees, and we have made them aware of Jordanian laws as much as we can. But these civil society organizations do require assistance, do require support, rather. In Aqaba, we do not have many Syrians, but my colleagues in Ramfa, Mafraq, Erbil, they do have lots of lawsuits with refugees. So, Dr. Saudi, thank you. What is the mechanism on which it is used to collect testimony from children? So how can I get testimony from children that is utilized in a study like the one that was presented today? Okay, so this is a direct question and answer. You can answer directly to each question, and please summarize your questions as much as possible. Let us get straight to the question because we have a limited amount of time left. So we will open the microphone, or rather open the floor for Dr. Saudi to answer that question. Go ahead. I think it's better to have a direct question and answer rather than compiling a number of questions. Actually, we selected two countries, Jordan and Tunisia, and they have a common situation because Jordan is next to Syria and Tunisia is next to Libya. And in Libya and Syria, they had conflict. So they are host countries to refugees, and this is why they were our first choice. There is another standard that we use, which is this. The Syrian refugee is in Jordan, and the Libyan refugee is in Tunisia, but we also have Syrian refugees in Tunisia. Why we selected Syrian refugees as a common denominator as well. And we selected Jordan and Tunisia as neighboring countries. As for children, we tried to collect live testimonies from children while concealing their identity, concealing the identity of children. And we utilized the Children's Rights Organization in Tunisia. We wanted to utilize this organization, but we were limited to time constraints, and this is why we took direct testimonies and indirect testimonies from people who supervise the children refugees or refugee children. These were the points that we relied on when we collected testimonies in the study. Go ahead. You have a question? Please use the microphone, whoever is speaking. Thank you. Again, let us keep the time consideration. Okay, my question is to Dr. Hayat Saudi. She presented a very good presentation, and she used certain Arabic words and phrases such as the impact of war on children. This is the phrase that we like to use in Arabic. Now he's just talking about the language aspect in her presentation. He's just correcting a couple of things for her. Now, in regards to refugee children, you gave us a definition of children refugees, but I do not think that children themselves migrate. Children migrate with their parents. So they are among migrants, but they did not migrate out of their own volition. Yes, but there were children who were displaced without their families and without their parents. So they were displaced or they were orphans without, so they were not parents. There were no parents. Yes, there was no direct interview in some instances, but in regards to your findings and the testimony and the healthcare and educational dimensions, I noticed in the table that there was no items relating to healthcare in particular. There was a healthcare dimension when the girl said that my brother is suffering, my brother's temperature is rising, but we said that there are differences between one country and the next. So, for example, we found that there was more begging among Libyan refugees in Tunisia because the refugees said that they are begging there, and we did not find this in other testimonies. So it depends on the circumstances of the refugees. Okay, so why 2030? That is quite far away, I would say. Can you elaborate on this 10 years from now in order to get that international identity for each person? Also, there is a question to the esteemed doctor from Libya. We know that the situation in Libya is difficult as it is in Syria. There is asylum there in Libya, but I think most of the asylum into Libya is transit asylum, so they're only there on a temporary basis, and they are moving on to Europe as well. So thank you for opening the floor for me to ask my questions. As for asylum to Libya from African countries, ever since the 2000 to 2011, there was refuge or asylum and settlement in Libya. And in addition to this, after the Libyan crisis in 2011 until now, the borders have been open basically. And in southern Libya, near Chad, Niger, Mali, etc., Sudan, the borders have been basically open, and there has been a demographic change in Libya. Yes, they do settle in Libya as well. They sit there for 5 or 6 years, and then they move on to another country. I think there's a question from Dr. Qasim. My name is actually Dr. Zayed Hamad, and I'm a researcher on the Syrian issue. And we sent a number of cases to Al-Adil Center in Amman. I have articles. The first article is relating to the international community abandoning its responsibilities towards Jordan. and this means that some refugees might have to return to Syria. And I also had an article about integration and settlement. But I had two questions that I will talk about right away. The first question is for Mohammed al-Majali. We had lunch together. And it is this. I hope that somebody can tell me, why didn't Jordan sign the UN Convention on Refugees of 1951? I want to know why Jordan didn't sign this. I asked this to somebody, but they didn't answer. Also, another question. If Jordan signs this convention, does this mean that there will be more responsibilities towards Palestinian refugees? Asma, you also talked about divorce and so on. My question is this: defined as them being refugees or not? Because I'm looking at UNHCR documents, and the UNHCR documents say refuge application or asylum application, but it does not say refugee particularly. So if you look at the document from UNHCR, it says refuge application or asylum application. Okay, so first, Mohammed al-Majali needs to answer on the signature of the convention. The other question was posed to Asma. Okay, go ahead. Thank you for your question. Actually, Jordan did not sign the 1951 convention. The justification is purely political. Purely political. Why? Because Jordan is hesitant to sign it, because signing means or might lead to the fact that Palestinian refugees might be considered eligible to take Jordanian nationality, and even if he does not take the Jordanian nationality, that person will remain in Jordan. This is the vision of the Jordanian state. When we look at this, the remaining or the settlement of Palestinian refugees in Jordan, then this means that in a sense the Jordanian state was betting on the fact that if it does not sign this convention, then return. As for of refugees are refugees. So we have a definition of refugees in Jordan, a particular definition of refugees in Jordan, and there is no special treatment of the refugees in the courts here. I did not read the UNHCR documents that you are referring to, but a refugee is considered a refugee here, and a refugee is legally protected. And the 1951 convention would create new commitments for Jordan, but Jordan did sign a memorandum for refugees. So Jordan is dealing practically with the refugees rather than looking at the text of the UNHCR. So thank you for all of the papers and researchers. I have a question for Mr. Majali and Ms. Asma as well. We know that we have like more than 50 nationalities in Jordan. Regarding the legal dimensions, are we applying the Jordanian law to all these nationalities, or are there specific laws for refugees? And there are also refugees and displaced persons. But are the laws interpreted differently for refugees, or is the same Jordanian law applied to all of the refugees? Thank you. Okay. We need to distinguish between a displaced person and a refugee. A refugee is somebody who left their homeland. As for law, there are memorandums of understanding between Jordan and the UNHCR, and these memorandums contain these details that we are talking about. So, Jordan relies on the memorandum of understanding and on certain international conventions that we refer to in the paper, which Jordan is committed to even without signing. So Jordan is acting in a compatible fashion with its laws that do not contradict international conventions and do not contradict the memorandum of understanding between Jordan and UNHCR, which is the link, you could say. And I hope I answered your question sufficiently. About sovereignty of the state, and so the country can implement its law. Everybody within Jordan can have the Jordanian laws applicable to them. Or implemented or applied to refugees. The refugees are subject to the law just like everybody else. As a legal person, I would like to answer as well and say this, in addition to what Muhammad and Asma said. Every Jordanian or foreigner who live in Jordan have the laws applied to them, have Jordanian laws applied to them. And if there are memorandums of understanding, then these are clarifying documents for the text of the law. And this is known as a principle of, you could say, regionalism of the law.
Your question, please, go ahead. Thank you. Dr. Zakaria Abu Damas. A question specifically to Dr. Majali and the other colleagues. What's the future vision of refugees or of refuge in the region? From my humble viewpoint, the future perception or vision for refugees is linked to a number of criteria or standards. The sponsor of this conference earlier said that we need to identify the root causes of refuge, and if we manage to deal with the problem at its roots, then we would have saved ourselves huge efforts. But given that refuge is a reality, in the future, we need to be well prepared and be prepared to host any new wave of refugees with special laws. We need to have special laws that regulate this process, because I believe that the law is the basis or the foundation for any future efforts. So the law is the foundation on which we build all our efforts and all the services that we will be providing to refugees. So laws and legislation will will control it all. And second, we need to be keen to ensure that we deal with refugees in a humanitarian way. Politics should not influence humanitarian work. And I'll give an example here. UNRWA, their funding is now 10% to what it used to receive. And this is a political issue. The US, the US had its politics affect or politics affected the humanitarian side and humanitarian funding for UNRWA. Okay, let's take another round of questions. Zainab Abu Hlayl from the Red Crescent Society. The refugee status card is a card issued for refugees that protect his rights or her rights. After 3 months, if he's in Syria, then this card will be taken away from him. Once the refugee leaves Jordan, this card is abolished for his own protection. Yeah, it's a refugee status card. You are hosted in Jordan. Are you done? I have another thing to add. I want to thank the doctor. When you work with children, you feel that the information you get and their testimonies help you conduct a good research. And usually children narrate their stories, and based on their stories you can identify their needs and serve them better. When I worked with children in 2013, I learned from them on how to deal with Syrian children and Jordanian children and with Yemeni children. And so working with children help us or expand our horizons. An intervention. I have an intervention with regards to the asylum seekers. Those seeking refuge or refugees should be under the protection of the UNHCR. Even those seeking asylum or asylum seekers are entitled to all privileges stated in the MOU between Jordan and the UNHCR. So they are under the supervision or under the mandate of the UNHCR. The lady is talking about the special security card for Syrian refugees, which is issued for Syrians inside Jordan. And to make their lives easier, the security card has been issued for Syrian refugees, and this security card is different from the UNHCR card. And the security card is used inside Jordan. If he leaves Jordan, this card will be withdrawn from him. Each foreigner is subject to the residency laws. We have 53 nationalities, including refugees. And these are under the mandate of the UNHCR. So refugees have the refugee status. As for the permanent solutions, it's either the voluntary return settlement in a third country and local integration. Jordan agreed to the first two, but it did not agree to the local integration of refugees. My question is to everyone. The theme of the conference is problems facing refuge in Jordan. Why haven't we spoken about investing in the skills of refugees? You're talking about 10% of the population who are refugees. So why don't we think of making use and investing in their skills, just like other countries did? We listen to Dr. Muhammad and then Ammar. Jordan encourages investment, and work permits are being issued nowadays to Syrian workers, whether in Mafraq and other cities. So we have job opportunities specifically for Syrians. And investment is allowed for anyone who owns 60,000 GDs or above. It's 100,000 maybe, or 68. So a refugee must have 68,000 GDs in order to invest. So investment is allowed in Jordan, and this is a great thing to think of. And I thank you for raising this. As for the integration into the local community, social integration in Jordan will come, will eventually take place. It's not approved, but approval will come eventually. Currently, it's not approved, but from what we see, they will be integrated into the society, and we will have to deal with the status quo at the end of the day. Mr. Ammar, thank you for these valuable questions and comments. I have 3 answers to the lawyer. You asked about how we enter data. This methodology is important. When the doctor took the samples from TV stations, it analyzed the data. And we had surveys and questionnaires that we collected data from. As for the lawyer, he said that refugees or refuge, he's asking about asylum seekers and the difference between asylum seekers and refugees. You're a lawyer, right? You're a professor, sorry. If you know about the law, if you apply to become a lawyer, so you have a status here. Now, asylum seeking is a phenomenon or is a status. An asylum seeker is a status that describes you, just like an engineer or a lawyer or a university professor. So it's a status. Asylum seeking is a status. I personally believe that asylum seeking is related or goes back to refuge. And as people or as humans, people have been migrating from one place to another. But now there is a legal framework, and I believe that migration and the waves of refugees will continue. And some people will be granted asylum, and others will continue to be as refugees. People have like to migrate from one place to another. That's a human nature. Migration is just a natural thing, but asylum seeking is a legal term. And refuge could be voluntary. You might go to another country and then ask for asylum, right? So on your behalf, we come to the end of our sessions for today. On your behalf and on the behalf of the University of Petra, we'd like to thank the scholars, rich discussions and rich presentations, for the valuable questions as well and comments. Hopefully we will meet you again in Jordan in future conferences. Thank you.